You know how sometimes lots of things you were looking forward to turn out to be disasters? Well, that's been happening for me lately, with examples like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's performance, Callisto Protocol's PC performance, my most recent presentation I've made at work, and even the latest sandwich I made. Really sad about the last one. So naturally, after so many disasters, I decided to embrace the chaos. And just play an entire game about disasters. I mean, if you're already covered in water, might as well go for a swim, right? Except, replace water with disasters in this analogy, I guess. With this in mind, I jumped straight into a game that I've wanted to play for a long time called Disaster Report 4. I never really had any contact with the series before, nor did I know anything about the game aside from the fact that it dealt with an earthquake hitting the in-game city. After playing through it and even getting the Platinum Trophy on PS5, I can't help but want to talk about the experience. The game is, in some ways, its own kind of disaster. The gameplay is very basic, and some would say it's almost akin to a slightly more involved point-and-click adventure. The game sometimes fails to provide the player with accurate directions. Glitches may permeate the experience. Hell, the game has an extremely average Metascore and user score on Metacritic. And yet, despite all this, I can safely say this was one of the most fascinating experiences I've had this year. It just appeals to my male fantasies in all the right ways, you know?
I wrote a blog post a while ago about why I hate video games, because this is what it does. It appeals to like the male fantasy.
Be warned that this video will contain some spoilers. The main thing that attracts me about the game is how inherently human it can be, and I can't talk about that without going into specific character stories. This game, despite its absurd Yakuza-like humor, still does a good job of reflecting just how a disaster exposes and reveals who we are as people. But I'll get there. For now, in case anyone doesn't know this game, I wanted to do a bit of an introduction to it. For those of you already familiar and not really willing to sit through minutes of what you already know, I'll try adding chapters to the video so you can skip this. But if not able to, I'll at least throw the timestamp to skip this section in the description of the video. Disaster Report 4 is, believe it or not a game about a reporter covering disasters. Instead, you're a random person experiencing the disasters. And it's not a bunch of disasters, it's just one, an earthquake. Although, it does repeat itself and there are tons of aftershocks, so I guess it can be multiple disasters, just not multiple different disasters. But anyway, none of this matters. What does matter is you're getting to a new city, and as you're arriving, there is a massive earthquake. Your bus topples over, and when you get out, the entire city is all wrecked. I'm talking vehicles everywhere, cracked buildings, things falling over, and constant aftershocks causing more and more destruction. And by the way, just a quick note, if you're uncertain what an aftershock is, it's basically a smaller earthquake that happens after a massive one. They often follow for hours or even days after an earthquake, and while their intensity gradually lowers, they all still pose a significant threat, as they can be the breaking point of structure that was already damaged in the earthquake itself and previous aftershocks, and can also hinder search and rescue efforts. This is exactly how it goes down in Disaster Report 4 as well, which I appreciate. What follows then is your effort to evacuate the city and return to your own place. In the process of doing so, however, you will meet a lot of people, many of which are going through their own personal tragedies and struggles. The gameplay, which is one of the aspects that are most criticized in the game, follows a very simple, for quite a few people, boring formula. You're basically in an area and the path to the next area is blocked. This is always your goal, to find your way into the next area. The way you do so is by talking to people and helping them out. Problem here is that this is usually all there is to it. You talk to one person and get a quest. Then you walk around trying to find someone that has relevant information until you do, and that person tells you to talk to a specific person. Then that specific person tells you to talk to another specific person. So on, so forth, until you find what you're looking for and you can go back to the first person in the chain. Occasionally, while doing that, the ground will shake in an aftershock and you have to crouch and brace or you will be knocked down. And for God's sake, try to pay attention to what exactly is happening around you as you brace, because there were plenty of times I braced right under whatever was about to fall and got instantly murdered. You also have a button to shout. Oi! 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 For some reason. And that's about it. While I acknowledge that this isn't a great gameplay loop, I didn't really mind it too much, except for some specific sections. This one, for example, has you running from one place to the next while carrying a grandma on your back. In this state, you can't run and it becomes the most agonizingly slow and boring section of the entire game. The game also suffers from a clear lack of direction at times. I'm not talking about a neon arrow flashing over and over saying, click this thing to progress, but sometimes I did find myself having to talk to every single person, and usually there are a lot, in the zone all over again because of how quest triggers work. For example, in the beginning a teacher tells you to look for her students. I had already walked through the entire zone and saw no one matching her description, so I went around the place again, only to see two of them will themselves into existence as I approached the place they were supposed to be in. Furthermore, sometimes you're supposed to climb things, except there's no clear indication that something can be climbed. And as you may have noticed by what I just said about the two students popping up, glitches do permeate the experience, even if they are not major. Now, it's important to note that this game had a troubled development cycle. It really did. It was supposed to come out in 2011, but it had to be postponed indefinitely due to the Great Tohoku, I hope I pronounced that right, earthquake and tsunami, a real-life natural disaster that killed thousands of people. If some aspects of the game feel less gen, it's because it was literally developed with the PS3 and such in mind, and unfortunately unable to be finished at the time. But regardless, while it does explain a bit of why the issues exist, it still doesn't change the fact that they do exist. So far, what I've mentioned and said about the game isn't exactly positive, right? So why do I enjoy it so much? Well, the soundtrack is awesome. And while the graphics aren't necessarily all that great, the environment they build is top-notch. The collapsing buildings, the destroyed streets, the occasional corpse, all of these feel like things you would see in a post-apocalyptic game. And yet, this isn't one. And I've never experienced a game that manages to give me that feeling in a modern-day, non-apocalyptic setting. And at the same time, somehow I feel like that's exactly what some people feel like they're living through in a situation like a natural disaster, an apocalypse, not knowing whether or not they will live through the next hour. The tone of the game also tickled my funny bone quite a bit. While it sometimes does fail in maintaining a respectful balance between jokes and seriousness, the game has an absurdity to it that never fails to make me laugh. This is a game that has subplots such as conning an entire shelter by selling alleged miracle water, or even joining and recruiting followers for a cult. Some other subplots feel more drama-oriented than a Brazilian soap opera, such as the entire plot about two neighborhoods that are at war and two young people, one from each neighborhood, in a forbidden relationship. This game, as shown earlier, allows you to ride a scooter wearing a maid uniform, a weird backpack, and honking a horn to the max. It's absolutely insane and I respect it for that. But, and this is where I wanted to get to, the game also feels inherently human, and that's what fascinated me most. As I said earlier, the game features many subplots, but it also goes a bit deeper than that. During the very first moment of the game, it asks you the following question. ある日、あなたが初めて訪れた街で巨大地震に遭遇したら、あなたはどう感じ、何を考え、そしてどう行動するだろうか。もちろん冷静に振る舞うだろう。怖くて一歩も進めないかもしれないな。人と助け合って生き延びたい。自分の大切な人を何が何でも守ろうとするだろう。一人でも多くの人を助けるのに
全力を尽くすつもりだ。
どんな時でも自分自身を大切にしたい。
人生を変える機会と捉えたい。
そんなのやってみないとわからないよ。
すべこべ言わずに早く始めてほしい。
So you can answer how you would react in an earthquake, which kinda gives you an idea that this is what your goal will be in the game as the player. However, in reality, your character will always be working towards escaping the city, as they should. But despite the main goal being to escape the city, I would say that Disaster Report 4 is not about you and your story, but rather, it's a game about many individual stories. The earthquake is a catalyst to the player experiencing those stories, sure, but it's not even the focus of some of those. One example is an old man that you meet right in the beginning, and then again closer to the end of the game. He says that he was forced to retire from his company, but that he was ashamed to say that to his family and has been pretending to go to work every day. Then, later on, he even ponders about whether or not to try and return to his family. This is unfortunately a situation that I've already somewhat seen happen in real life, and as such, it's absolutely a struggle I can empathize with. You can then obviously encourage the guy to go back home, or you can mock him, I guess, if you're that kind of person. Did the earthquake cause him to have all these issues? No, not at all. He already had them. But the earthquake did act as a catalyst for us to interact with this man and help, or not help him, as our character would likely have walked past him as just another face in the crowd had the circumstances not been what they were. We see it time and again with catastrophes like these, people banding together and helping each other, learning more about their fellow human beings and making connections as they try to survive. But similarly, we also see the opposite, those who take advantage of the chaos to scam others, kidnap others, and do a lot of worse things. Both parts of the situation are very well represented in the game, and you, as the player, interact with them. We meet, for example, a teacher called Miss Higa. She's a sweet woman who really cares about the 3 students under her tutelage, even though they don't really care about her at all. In fact, 2 of them are major asshats. We help them get through certain areas and even mediate conflicts within the group, which includes severe situations of bullying. And, major spoilers here, so skip ahead 45 seconds or so if you don't want them. Even though Miss Higa doubts herself and longs to see her little brother, she doesn't hesitate to push the player character and the bullied student out of a collapsing building, getting herself killed in the process. And despite the 3 students' original dismissal of her, they all cry and build her a memorial, as she proved herself to be the caring, loving, and reliable person we always knew she was. On the flip side, we have a guy posing as a convenience store manager that we see throughout the entire game. We originally meet him early on, helping him get toilet paper as the bathroom he's in has none. He then proceeds to overprice all items he sells in the convenience store, going so far as to try to sell us a 40k yen bottle of water just because he knows we need it. And then the true owner of the convenience store gets there and gives it to us for free. To me, this character was fascinating because he didn't exactly have a character arc, nor did he need one. He didn't prove himself to a group of students and find his confidence to lead them like Miss Higa did. In fact, our very last interaction with him is when he saves us from a mob, only to demand 50k yen in return. And when we're unable to give it to him, he yells our location to the furious crowd. This is who he is, and it's clear by the end that this is who he will always be. At least in this chaotic scenario. I say at least in a chaotic scenario because lots of characters only act the way they do in the game due to the circumstances. This is why I said early on that a disaster can reveal who we are as people, and the game reflects that. In fact, in an interview with Nintendo World Report, the chief producer of Disaster Report 4, Kazuma Kujo, talks a bit about that. He says, and I quote, that this time we emphasize the realistic aspects of experiencing an earthquake or just a natural disaster in general, like a shortage of food or immense stress and how to survive for 6 or 7 days under such circumstances. Betrayal is one theme, as the player will encounter others who may deceive them or act prejudiced towards them. And you can clearly see this philosophy. Shortage of food, prejudice, all of those are themes in the game and plots of sub-stories. And yes, the stress and perhaps opportunity generated by the circumstance absolutely gets to people. At some point, we are in a building that's flooding. It's where we spend our very first night of the game, actually. We wake up with another aftershock and realize that we have to get out as fast as possible, so we do. The lady that lent us her apartment asks us to take her with us on our boat, and we agree. She asks us to just wait a moment while she gathers her and her children's things. But as we get on the boat to wait for her, the building collapses, taking her and the children with it. There's nothing we can do, just leave. And while some might feel inclined to judge this character for not leaving as soon as possible too, the truth is most of us can't know how we would react. And honestly, I hope it remains that way. This is likely the place she had been living in for years. Her life is there. Her children have possessions they love. And while, yes, those are possessions, sometimes in the stress and anxiety of the situation, it's hard to think clearly. She tried to hold on to even just a bit of her old life, the bit she thought she needed, like clothes and similar things, and she unfortunately passed away for it. And I honestly can't say it's her fault. At another point, a character alludes to not even caring if he dies or not anymore, and that since there's a real possibility of it happening, he would do whatever he wanted. In this specific case, whatever he wanted meant tying the main character up along with his female companion, with eventual plans to take advantage of them, to put it in YouTube-friendly ways. He might not have done what he did if everything wasn't abandoned, if the police weren't struggling to keep the order, if pillaging and scrambles for survival weren't happening left and right. But they were. And so, being the awful person he was, he took advantage of the situation to let the side of him come out. And you know what's worse? There is a possibility that he succeeded later on, as you eventually, near the end of the game, come across one of the many people you've met in your journey, another female companion, tied up, crying alone in an abandoned jewelry store. The game is not afraid to deal with these heavier topics, and thankfully for this specific one, there were no joke options. But you can choose to leave her there. It's an option I would never choose, obviously, nor even consider, but it's still there for the player, and that's one of this game's philosophies. See, for a lot of the game, you will be given many weird options. You'll see a woman panicking, for example, and somehow be given the option to hit on them. Lots of the options will be downright humor-oriented, such as the first time you meet the fake store manager. You have no idea he's a fake store manager, but you can't just tell him you are the manager. He calls your bluff, obviously, but I still chose that option because the idea of telling the assumed real manager of a store that they are fake was hilarious to me. The thing is, a lot of the options the game gives you as the player may seem downright insane or evil to a lot of us, and in some ways they are. They also don't massively change the outcome of the game itself, just somewhat changes the outcome of the subplots. But I think the reason why they gave these options, which are, in a lot of cases, slightly different variations of each other, is to accommodate for just how many ways a person might react in a colossal natural disaster situation. Well, that and to fit into the absurd humor I mentioned earlier. Though, like I said, it sometimes comes across as tone deaf when you can mock people for their suffering. But maybe that's just me. In fact, again, producer Kazuma Kujo confirms that the options are there for people to choose how they would react. Quote, another example is when you're within a rescue area, several problems come up, and it's up to the player on how to act. So this ability to choose one's own course of action reflects how more in tune to reality this installment is. I'm not sure I'd say some of these options are really in tune to reality, but I also don't know every single person in the world, so who knows? Maybe there really is at least someone who would react in every single one of these ways. Worst thing is, sometimes I did find myself choosing these options to take advantage of other people. The world isn't a black and white place, and at the end of the day, for a lot of people it's about a survival. It's about those shades of grey. For my character's situation, it was the same. I had to sell an item that I was supposed to give away, for example, because I had no money and my character was hungry. The survival elements of the game don't actually make much of a difference, but at the time I didn't know that, and figured I had to get more money through any means necessary so I wouldn't starve and game over or something. I'd like to think I had an easy time doing so because it's a video game, but the truth is we never know how we're going to act in an immediate disaster until it's upon us. I obviously don't know how it feels, but I would imagine that it does reveal who we are as people, sometimes even to ourselves. So this is what I mean when I say that the game consists of a bunch of individual stories rather than your main struggle being the focus. You meet a wonderful cast of characters and deal with all sorts of very human issues. Grief, loss, death. The natural disaster makes it so we learn about and help others deal with their own personal disasters. And I feel there's just something inherently human about the entire experience that I can't help but feel drawn to, even if the humor can undermine this aspect quite a bit at times. Throughout your time with the game, you will find a struggling fashion designer, Italian restaurant workers distraught about the destruction, company president desperate to save his company from stocks that are falling off a cliff after the earthquake, and many other characters. Throughout your in-game week, you'll see them multiple times over different days, advancing their storylines as you go. And the best thing? The game has an epilogue! The earthquake might be temporary, but a lot of true connections are forged in times of need. Or at least that's the case for our main character, who returns to the city he was stuck in 5 months after the disaster to check on the characters. This epilogue is a nice way to give us closure on many of the characters that ended up not having full resolution to their tales. And while I'd normally complain about that, the truth is we are in an earthquake. Their issues won't be resolved in 1 week, especially not such a disastrous one in which you're forced to focus on survival. And that's okay. That's human. In one last trump card, the game closes by asking you again the very same question that it asked in the beginning of the game. How would you react to such an earthquake? The answer doesn't do anything. It doesn't change what happens afterwards, because pretty much nothing happens afterwards. No, the question is instead for the player, and to me, it read like this. And now, after experiencing many different stories, the wackiness and sadness contained within this game, are you any closer to reaching an answer? And I can safely say I was, even if I can't be sure if it will be how I'll react in real life. And truth be told, I hope I never find out.
もし巨大地震にあったら、しかも初めて訪れた町で巨大地震にあったとしたら、僕は自分の大切な人を何が何でも守ろうとするだろう。
What about you? Do you know your answer? I hope this sheds some light into my enjoyment of the game. It's rare for me to see a game that deals with such raw humanity, even if it's more on the funny side of things. I know Disaster Report 4 is a very flawed experience in many ways, but it's a flawed experience that I urge anyone who might be curious to give a shot. In fact, a lot of people complained about the $60 price tag back when the game released, but recently, at least for some people, this issue was solved. The game is available on PlayStation Plus Extra subscription. It's how I played it. It won't take too much of your time either, about 10 to 15 hours. And there's also a demo on Steam that has the first area of the game if you wish to give it a shot. I also hear this is one of the weakest entries in the series, so perhaps it's fortunate that I started with it. I can't wait to give the others a shot. And that'll do it for me. This was a longer video than I'm used to making, but honestly, I had a lot I wanted to get off my chest in regards to this experience. It was very interesting, and I can't wait to see where, if anywhere, the series goes next. But I hope it goes somewhere. If you liked the video, do leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And also, check out my other content. I have video essays, I have reviews, and I'm always posting something new. But above all else, please do leave a comment. I love hearing from all of you, and I would love to see your take on this whole thing, and on the game itself. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.
山内さんと清水さんにも声をかけてきてちょうだい。 わかりましたわ。